Welcome, football fans, to Saturday Showdown, the ultimate touchdown for your college football fix. Each week, we'll dive into the hottest games, standout players, and pivotal moments that define the season. Whether you're a die-hard fan or just tuning in for the first time, we got all the stats, stories, and insights to keep you at the top of your game. So grab your favorite snack, get comfy. It's time to kick off another episode of Saturday Showdown.
Welcome in, college football fans. We are having another exciting episode for you guys. Ohio State leaves Penn State and Happy Valley with the win. You have Texas A&M going on the road, getting the loss, and Indiana is 9-0 so far this season. Welcome in, guys. We have Jake from the Walk On Red Shirts podcast joining us tonight. Jake, how's it going?
Appreciate you guys having me. I'm doing pretty good.
So, it was another fun week of college football. We saw some upsets. The 2007 lookalike season continues as we see teams losing and, coming off big games and, having hangovers, if you will. Thinking about Texas A&M losing on the road to South Carolina. You had Clemson losing to Louisville. But then you had teams that, the biggest game of the week was Buckeyes getting the big win at Happy Valley. I still don't know why that wasn't a night game, but, whoever makes the schedule messed up there as far as I think, getting viewerships there in a big game. But I know, we got Dylan here, our resident Ohio State fan, and then Jake joins us as an Ohio State fan as well. So we'll go ahead and talk about this game. You guys get the win on Saturday and then 11 a.m. kickoff, 20-13 over at Penn State. What are your guys' initial thoughts, on that game and, when you were watching it?
Go, Jake.
I mean, my biggest takeaway is that James Franklin is still in a pattern when the biggest moments come around that he does not think logically. As I've watched plenty of Ohio State, Penn State games in my lifetime, it goes back to me thinking about 2017, 2018, 2017. They've got a 3-score lead, and in the end of the game, they're like just trying to run the ball out and not doing anything to try to continue to win the game. 2018, they're up 11 points again. Ohio State comes back, and there's an infamous 4th and 5 where instead of putting the ball in Trace McSorley's hands, who had been going nuts, they decide to try to run it, and it doesn't work. Here, you go to 2 chances to score inside the 5-yard line. You run 4 plays with 7 minutes left in the game. 3 of them are runs straight up the gut, not even trying to be creative, get to the outside. And your last one is a pass where everybody knew it was a pass because they switched running backs. Nick Singleton hadn't gone up the middle really recently, and Katron Allen had run 3 balls straight up the middle. So everybody knew it was a pass. And then you just put 3 guys basically in the same spot in the end zone. Tyler Warren gets covered up immediately because logically they're going to try to throw Tyler Warren. And instead, I don't know why they didn't get more creative. Their whole season, it was Andy Kotelnicki is going to be this creative play caller. They tried to do a couple different things, but when it came down to it, he went back to the most bland play calling he could figure out, and it obviously didn't work.
Yeah, and that was, and it surprised me watching all that too because, like you said, having a couple chances to score, basically on the 5-yard line, and one of them coming after Ohio State dropped basically a walk-in touchdown. You caught a huge break, and then you drive up the field, get in the red zone, and then you can't score. And I was surprised, they didn't try to run the middle. I feel like, their rush game was basically non-existent. They didn't really use Singleton like I thought they were going to do. Their defense played great, and in my eyes, that's really the only reason why they were really in the game, to be honest. But I know last week we had talked about it. I basically said my key takeaways for this game for Ohio State to win is I wasn't so much worried about Will Howard anymore. I feel like he's played well enough all season, but I was really worried about getting Judkins, get him running again. Last 2 games, he's, you go from the Oregon game, and then last week against Nebraska, he's basically ran for like 25 yards a game. And I really like Judkins. He's a quick dude, fast, hard-nosed runner, and I really wanted to get him going. And he did great, 14 carries for 95 yards. And then I really wanted the defense to step up. That was a close game last week, and obviously we give a bunch of points to Oregon 2 weeks ago, and I thought the defense played great. They stopped Alar He only had 146 yards and an interception, no touchdowns. Their best running back, or the best rusher, was Warren, and he had 3 carries for 47 yards. He had the most yardage in the rushing committee. So I was very happy with how we played. Penn State's, it's always going to be a close game, and it has been for a handful of years. But James Franklin just can't seem to get it done. But I was very thrilled with how we played, especially on the defensive side. And I was really happy to see that Judkins, he found his, he found where he has been at all season. So I was happy to see that.
Yeah, the offensive line, I know, was a major concern for everybody heading into that week because you're on your third left tackle. They moved Donovan Jackson, who was basically an All-American guard, out to left tackle. Bring in Carson Hinsman, who was a starting center last year, lost his job to Seth McLaughlin. So when you put Carson Hinsman in there, you're not getting a brand new offensive guard, which I think went under the radar. They moved guys around, but all 5 had been starters at least in some point in their career, which in that kind of environment, I think is very important. If you just bring, a Jimmy or Joe off the bench and throw him in there for his first start in Happy Valley, it's probably not the best situation. So the offensive line paved the way. I mean, Abdul Carter for Penn State, he got 2 sacks. He did own Donovan Jackson a couple times. He should have had a 3rd sack on a 4th down play. Will Howard avoids him and finds Jelani Thurman for like a 15-yard gain after Thurman nearly dropped the pass about 4 times. But, like you said, Will Howard made the plays he needed to do. I know he throws a pick 6 to basically start the game, and Ohio State is in a 10-0 deficit before we're even, 4 plays into Ohio State having the ball. We're 10 minutes into the game, and Penn State's got a 10-0 lead, and Ohio State's run 3 plays. The comeback after that, though, was really good to see. Ohio State had to go down and score. And I thought Chip Kelly went deep into his bag to score that. And also at one point, I thought Ohio State was rubbing their receivers into the fact that they have so many talented receivers for Penn State. Ohio State scores a 2nd touchdown there to go up 14-10. Emeka Ibuka, Carnell Tate, and Jeremiah Smith are all on the bench during that play. Ohio State had their 4th, 5th, and 6th receiver out there playing, and Penn State had a total of 3 catches by wide receivers on Saturdays. I think that they were almost just flaunting the fact that their receiver talent is so good, and Penn State's is not.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about Ohio State. That's one thing you never have to worry about Ohio State. It's kind of almost like Alabama when Saban was there. Everything is just so deep on the bench. You have talented players, in every position, at every aspect. But I'm really curious to hear Caleb, because I know that was Caleb's concern for Ohio State on Saturday, was their offensive line. Because he picked Penn State to win, which I was not a fan about. But he had every reason to. Penn State's defense has played really well. They were bringing the pressure on everybody, and I know that was one of his concerns for Ohio State is if that offensive line isn't good, they're probably going to get tore up. And like Jake said, I think that was a lot of people's concern, with how bad the offensive line was. But how did you feel like they did, Caleb?
Yeah, I was trying to give James Franklin the benefit of the doubt or the opportunity to change that narrative, like you guys said, that great coach gets the wins, but can never win the big ones. And, like you mentioned, it always seems to lose one that they shouldn't. That hasn't happened so far this season, but you still have a handful of games left this season that could very well happen. But yeah, like you said, and like Jake mentioned, even though the offensive line was banged up, you didn't just have anybody thrown in there starting. It was guys that had experience that, you weren't thrown into an environment, that was, like a Happy Valley with your first start. It was guys that have been there before, had starting experience. And so I think that made a big difference. And like you said, Dylan, it was big to get the running game established again for especially Judkins and, what you guys like to do. And it makes you less one-dimensional and kind of, keeps that defense on the edge of, knowing, oh, hey, well, we can stop the run, so we're going to have to force them to pass. And like you said, the wealth of receivers that you guys have is, similar to how Bama's been. You got depth there. Like when you're first, second, third, guys are on the bench, and you still run out 4, 5, and 6, and they're still just so much better than, probably would start anywhere else in the country. And so, yeah, I mean, props to you guys, and for Ohio State going into Happy Valley and getting the win and keeping those the playoffs hopes alive there.
And you were right, Caleb. They did put a whole white out. I mean, it was. I mean, it
was the helmet stripe game.
Yeah,
because they're legally not allowed to do more than one whiteout a year.
That's you got to give credit to that whole Ohio State team, because after losing to a game where you had plenty of opportunities to win in Oregon, and that was a big game, and it was a big loss for us, and then playing a really tough game against Nebraska, and then coming in here where, I mean, that's not an easy place to go into and win. The crowd was loud. Everybody was into it. You had a banged up offensive line, even though the guys were absolutely established and they had experience. That's still, when you're put in positions where you don't play normally, I mean, that's a hard place to walk into, having kind of a different type of system on that offensive line for a game. So I give credit to all of them. They got the run game going. Will Howard, after making a mistake, came back, and I thought he played flawlessly after that mistake. Some guys will get down when making a mistake like that real quick, but he didn't. Chip Kelly dug in his bag. Ryan Day did a good job coaching. The defense, I thought, was phenomenal. That was a really good win for Ohio State overall, I thought.
Ohio State's 2 passing touchdowns, if you go back and look, they may not be the exact, but they're very close to the same play, because on the first one, Ibuka starts on the left side, basically crosses and ends up on a wheel route to the end zone. They ran basically the same thing, except they threw to the underneath crossing route on the second one, because they saw how open everybody was. So, you try it once, it works, try it again, still worked. Almost surprised they didn't try it again, because it just kept working. But one thing about this game is, going into the game, I thought Penn State would find success running the ball. I knew Ohio State's defensive line would do well. I didn't think they would hold the running backs to 18 carries for a total of 42 yards, compared to Ohio State's running backs, who had 24 carries for 149 yards. If you had said that before the game, you would have been shocked that Ohio State was going to run for over 6 yards a carry, and Penn State's running backs were going to average less than 3.
Yeah.
That was, to me, was one of the things, because I don't think that they did a very good job of putting the playmakers in position. And also, Drew Aller was injured last week. I thought he looked okay, but I'm surprised they didn't put the backup Bo Perula in more to move him around. Ohio State wasn't scared of Drew Aller running the ball. They didn't even think he was going to run the ball, because they didn't even spy him. There was a handful of plays where Drew Aller ran the ball early in the first few possessions. Ohio State realized they had to actually cover him, but Perula is way more mobile. I was surprised that he only ended the game with 1 carry for 0 yards and 1 pass attempt for 4 yards. Ohio State struggled with Dylan Raiola and Dylan Gabriel when they got loose and moved the ball with their legs. Drew Aller, even if he was going to move, was not going to have the explosiveness that Perula was going to be able to provide. So I thought they did not do a good job of giving Perula an opportunity to work as well.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Yeah, that was the big thing too. We talked about last week was what was going to happen with Drew Aller, and being that game time decision that did get the start. But like you guys said, with him being kind of still getting a start, but he wasn't 100%. Where was the game plan of getting the other guy in there and giving him some reps and opportunities to see what he can do especially with him being more mobile. So, like we said, typical James Franklin game, not getting the big ones won. And Dylan and I talked about it before. We said that if there was going to be a year for him to get it done, it was going to be this year, with kind of how things played out with college football as a whole. And not to rule them out, but it makes it even tougher now to, even though they're still ranked in top 12, number 6. So, there's still a shot that they make the playoffs there, but it's going to be tough, tough sledding for the rest of the season, and that they can't lose any of those games that they shouldn't, like we just talked about. So we'll stay in the Big Ten. We'll jump over. Oregon takes care of business against Michigan. I'm sure you guys love to see that as well. Oregon's really shown up. Michigan, they're we've talked about all season. They're just bad this year, and there's no way around it. They did seem to have a little bit more success in the passing game this week, throwing for 164 yards. Davis Warren starting again, but Oregon comes out, does their things. Dylan Gabriel 294 yards and a touchdown. He also adds a touchdown on the ground where they rushed for 176 yards. One thing to note is Tez Johnson, that one of their better receivers, is injured after this game. They said it's not season ending, but it is something that would probably keep him out for a few games.
Yeah, it was very funny that Michigan has basically been terrible throwing the ball all year long, and then against Oregon, the number one team in the country, they have their most success with 2 passing touchdowns. And then they kind of played a little bit of vice versa. Usually the run game has been strong all year, pass game has just been atrocious. And this year they this game they flip-flopped. 2 passing touchdowns, they found more success with no turnovers, believe it or not, no interceptions by the quarterback. But their 2 main running backs, Edwards and Mullings. I mean, one had 10 Donovan Edwards, 10 carries, 52 yards, Mullings 8 carries, 16 yards. So they could not get, those two could not get going on the ground, which is a little unusual. But yeah, I mean, I love to see Michigan lose. No, that one thing doesn't make me more happier. But at the same time, I mean, it is still scary to see. I know Michigan's not a very good team. A lot of people aren't worried about them, but Oregon's been on a roll, and ever since they beat Ohio State, I feel like they've been playing significantly better on both sides of the ball. Seems like Oregon's been known for having a very good offense, very fast pace. Everything everything is speed. Throw the ball, and then their defense, has particularly I feel like been bad. They just beat a lot of teams because they can put up 60 points a game. But ever since that Ohio State game, I feel like their defense has really came together and has been playing, a little wholer. I know it's against Michigan, so I mean that's not really saying anything, but it's definitely something to watch out for, because I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State finds them again in the Big Ten championship game, and I feel like that's going to be a tougher game than the first one, but I mean, credit to them for winning, because Oregon's on a roll and they look good. I'm just happy to see Michigan go down in the flames for that one.
I was about to say, look at it. Oh, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, so I think the box scores don't tell the full story here, because I think Michigan was actually in this game pretty late. They actually were about in the red zone, down 2 scores, still about 8 minutes left. But to me, the biggest issue here with this game was, they were missing Jair Hill and Will Johnson, 2 of their best cornerbacks. So Oregon obviously has a very good, passing attack with Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden. But when you're missing guys like Hill and Johnson, it's not going to be easy. But the biggest to me was the coaching mistakes that you can still tell with Sherrod Moore being so young. He challenges a catch that by everybody who's watched football in history of forever is you have to maintain possession of the ball when you go to the ground. Colston Loveland has the ball in his hands. Obviously, a knee is down and he's going out of bounds. And as soon as his back hits the ground, the ball ricochets 18 yards. Anybody who's ever watched football knows that we have been told for the last however many years that you have to maintain possession through the contact with the ground. And to me, he was told that somebody upstairs told him to say that, and he needs to know better than that. He's got to have the right people there. I think Michigan is in a very bad spot at this point. I think they're just continuing to get beat down. They make some very weird calls. They're down at the 10-yard line, and Davis Warren, the pass is like a fade route, and he just airmails it out of bounds. Not the play call, especially when you can still get a first down. It felt desperate. I think Sherrod Moore is benefiting from what was still there last year. I'll be very interested to see what he does next year, but they're still fighting. I know they lose by 21 points, but Oregon takes the ball, goes 90 yards, and scores to end the game. If this is a 14-point game, do we view it different? I mean, Oregon literally scores with seconds left on the clock. They cover the spread, but if it's a 14-point game, do you view it a little bit different? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that possibility there. But and then I was going to say, too, when you look at it, the rest of the way for Oregon, I mean, it seems like, this has been a weird season, and not to say anything can happen, but you look at the rest of their schedule. From here on out, I don't see any really challenging games on their schedule. You've got Maryland up next at home, who Maryland's 4-4, 1-4 in conference play. You've got on the road at Wisconsin, who's 3-3 in conference, 5-4 overall, and then you end the season with Washington at home, who is probably out of those three left the best opponent to play. So, we were just talking about it. You're set up now for the potential meetup and rematch between Oregon and Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. But yeah, the rest of the way, do you see any of these teams challenging Oregon throughout the rest of the season?
Washington's the only team that I think could remotely challenge them. Wisconsin, you had me for a second, and then they lost by 32 to Iowa last week. And Braden Locke is their quarterback. Tyler Van Dyke maybe would have provided a little bit more help, but I'm not sold on Wisconsin right now. I was in for a second, and now I'm back out.
Yep, that's exactly how I feel. I was in Wisconsin for, I was on that board for a second, and then it kind of seems like they just kind of fell apart too. So
I'm not sold on Washington either.
No.
They've had a very up and down season. I mean, you talk about they lose to Washington State, they lose to Rutgers. They beat USC, but what does that actually count for anymore? If you had beat them in week one, maybe a little bit different because that was the team that beat LSU. You beat them now. USC's fighting to even get to a bowl game and sitting at 4-5 right now.
Yeah. Good question here. We'll take it back, rewind it real quick. Aaron Blueshirt's banner says, does James Franklin have to make the college football playoffs to keep his job?
No.
Yeah, I don't think he has to make that to keep his job, but I will say in my eyes, he's kind of in the same boat that Jim Harbaugh was in Michigan. You can win games, but he can't win the big games. And at some point in time, just in my eyes, at some point in time, I feel like that's not going to keep your job. If you go all this way and then you keep losing to Ohio State or you keep losing the big games, I mean, at some point in time, I feel like they're going to find somebody who will. But I don't. But it's also hard to. I mean, the guy has a good football team every year. It's hard to, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, I don't think he has to make the college football playoffs to keep his job necessarily.
The problem with Penn State is you've got two different factions here. You've got the fans that believe that they're a top 5 program. You've got the administration that believes they're a top 15 program. If you're a top 15 program, all you got to do is win 10 games every year and you're safe. If you're a top 5 program, you need to be contending for national championships. The two don't match up. Mm-hmm. The two just don't match up. And with what Penn State is, they should be having in top 5 in NIL. They always boast about how many CEOs went to Penn State. They've got 60,000 kids on campus. You got to think how many alumni they are. They have like millionaire and billionaires that can help with NIL. Some of the problem is that they can't fix is their true location. I mean, you are 2 hours away from the nearest large airport. So when you want to fly across the country, you have to get on a bus for 2 hours to go get on a plane that can go to LA. And you've got to think how many kids want to go that far if they have to fly and all that. You have logistic issues there. But the biggest issue is James Franklin could lose out and he'll keep his job. I can say that with the utmost confidence. He could lose 8, win 8, go 8-4. They're not going to fire him. There's no reason to. The other aspect is, are you content winning 10 games? Or do you want to risk that and go try to become an 11 or 12 win team, but that your downfall is you could be Nebraska? Would you rather win 10 games guaranteed every year? Maybe you have a down season every year. Or would you rather be Nebraska, who has not been to a bowl game in like 7 years, who's on their 3rd head coach, who still might not make a bowl game? Yeah. Penn State would rather get the money. They know where the money's coming from. If they start doing that, they're going to lose it. You're going to lose NIL money. You're going to start losing fans. You're not going to sell as many tickets. You're not going to sell as much merchandise. All of that plays into it. And Penn State knows that. And they're not going to fire a coach that wins 10 games every year who would be snatched up by any sort of mid to upper tier program. Programs would fire somebody if they knew they'd get James Franklin. If a program like Mississippi State, they would fire Arnett in a heartbeat to go get There are so many programs out there that would just fire their coach to go get James Franklin if they knew they were going to win 10 games every year because they'd be content with it.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, and he's one of the guys, because I know they were talking about it on the game day and everything with, this matchup being the matchup between guys that, James Franklin went to Penn State. He's back at his alma mater.
He went to East Stroudsburg, technically. He's from Pennsylvania, though.
Yeah. Is he a guy that, on the flip side of this question, do you think he would leave for another job? Or is he content, like you said, being, top 10 program, winning those 10 games every year? Or would he want to leave and go to somewhere else to compete?
I think he will continue to entertain job offers as long as they come to him, because there is a faction at Penn State that is still Joe Paterno-esque. Joe did it this way. Joe did it that way. And it doesn't matter how many years. It's going to take 15 more years before that faction really starts to go away and starts to acknowledge that the bottle's been opened. You can't put it back in. So it's going to take years. There's a reason why James Franklin is out here lobbying for a larger runway at the airport. He's had to lobby for everything he's had. He's had to claw to get everything. And the problem is, as he's clawing for all that stuff, programs like Ohio State are being gifted it. He is clawing to get every NIL dollar he can. And programs like Alabama, programs like Texas, programs like Ohio State have donors that are willing to just come in and be like, yeah, here's $2 million. You need it. Meanwhile, he's got to scratch and claw for every $10,000, $20,000 donation to do NIL to retain his roster. He loses guys like King Mack and Keandre Lambert-Smith to the Alabama schools, for various reasons. But I think if a program, Florida keeps getting thrown around. I thought USC he would actually entertain, but there are going to be programs out there that continue to offer him stuff and he's going to listen, because eventually he's going to get tired of it. Now, Pat Kraft, their AD at Penn State, has done a really good job of helping to make that easier. Sandy Barber, last one, did not do as good of a job of helping that aspect. So I think it might get easier for him, but I think eventually he might just think, this is the best I can do here. If I want to win a national championship, I got to go somewhere else.
Yeah. It's one of those things that'll be interesting to see, like if the right fit comes along where he's like sees the difference, like you were saying, and I can just act like I'm gonna be given all this NIL just to be able to help compete, retain players, whatnot, instead of what I've had to do in the past, and ask for it, claw for it, and take some of that pressure off, or that strain of having to work so hard for it whenever he can look over and be like, oh, I can go to this program and, they're going to give me what I need.
If Nick Saban needed an upgraded locker room over the last 10 years, do you think if he even needed to ask twice, he could have just dropped it in a conversation and it would have showed up? If James Franklin wants to upgrade his locker room, he's going to have to go and give a full spiel to donors of how it's going to impact and how it's going to help them. Now, granted, Nick Saban won national championships, but I mean, even if you go down to Texas and go to Steve Sarkisian, I'll bet you, he wants to upgrade his locker room, he'll have it in a week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see with some potential openings after the season, what happens there. Like one you mentioned, like there's a good chance that by the end of the season, Napier's not the coach at Florida. There's a potential there. There's a lot of, big donors and funds down in Florida that want to see that program get back to, the days of, ironically, the guy you mentioned Urban Meyer, and the winning ways that a lot of those Florida fans are used to. So that's a potential there. Don't know how interested he would be into going to something like that, but there's always potential. As we keep going here, one of the other probably bigger games of the week, Texas A&M and South Carolina. That I told Dylan this last week, I said, watch out for Texas A&M, that they don't have a hangover after a big emotional win at home versus LSU the prior week. And not saying that's 100% it, but, they come into South Carolina and lose by 24. Very surprising here. I think one of the more surprising things was in a sense of, I talked to, I have a A&M friend at work that he didn't think that Marcel Reed would get the start here. I, on the other hand, said, why not give the hot hand the ball? He's won 3 other games earlier in the season for you. He comes in and wins a big game against, LSU at night at Kyle Field. So they give him the start, and, average day, 206 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But, man, this South Carolina team came out ready to fight, and, they took it to Texas A&M.
Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders had themselves a day. I mean, Lenore Sellers has 350 total yards, over 240 something in the air, another 100 on the ground. Rocket Sanders goes for 150 on the ground, another 100 or so in the air. I mean, these two just demolished, did everything they could to put Texas A&M away. This game was close at halftime, and then the second half, Texas A&M couldn't do anything. They couldn't move the ball. They were turning the ball over.
They don't even score a point in the second half. So
they had multiple turnovers in the second half. They got stopped on downs. They punted. It was just an absolute bad day. And I think also last week gave us a false hope of what Texas A&M could be. People forget Mike Elko's in his first year. There's been over 70 players that have entered the portal over the last 2 years for Texas A&M. So this is not the Texas A&M team that had that number 1 class with 85 defensive linemen that were all 5 stars on the team. This roster has turned over a decent bit. Evan Stewart's not there anymore. Connor Wegman was injured most of the year. Marcel Reed's a freshman. Something like this was going to happen before the end of the year. And South Carolina is a better team than people give credit to. I mean, Rocket Sanders is an incredibly underrated running back. He was, he was Arkansas last year. The guy, I mean, he's not always the most consistent, but he's got that explosive ability to him.
100%. And, I think that's the big thing too is, and I've said it before, I think it's getting to the point A&M and that fan base may have to accept Connor Wegman's not it. They've been waiting for a few years now for him to be the next guy that's going to be the quarterback.
Are Texas A&M and Penn State the same team? Like, are they really the same program overall? Like, they both think that they should be top 5, but they're really top 15. A&M has more money. We all know that one. But, I mean, you don't buy out a $60 million coach without having boatloads of money. But is A&M actually ever going to be competitive in the SEC where they can make the SEC championship game? Same thing as Penn State has made 1 Big Ten championship game since they started it back in 2013, 2012. Are they basically the same program?
Yeah. With the teams that are in the SEC, I don't see Texas A&M even remotely making an SEC championship game. And I mean, same with Penn State, especially with Oregon there now. I mean, and if Indiana stays good, I mean, I don't think Penn State.
That's a big if there. I'll give you that one. Yeah. That's a big if. Signetti might be gone after this year.
But then Penn State just with all that competition, having Michigan and Ohio State that's hard to overcome as it is. But then adding Oregon to the mix, I mean, that doesn't make anything easier for Penn State. I don't see them getting to a Big Ten championship anytime soon. And you just got blown out by South Carolina, but having teams like Texas and Georgia, Alabama, I mean, I don't see Texas A&M. I mean, I couldn't tell you how long, but I don't see them being better than any of those guys in the coming years. In the years to come, I don't see Texas A&M outbeating any of those guys. So no, yeah.
I want to hear your thought, Caleb.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You have Texas A&M fans that always come out and, like you said, they think they're the cream of the crop. I mean, it's the running joke in the SEC that they're a cult. Everybody knows it. With, some of their traditions and things they have going on. But like you said, for the resources and, things of that nature that they have done there, there's no reason they shouldn't be successful, but it always seems like something's standing in the way. Like you said, you don't just go off and, fire a coach with a $60 million buyout. Like it's nothing like they did. So, that's the surprising thing. I think a lot of other teams that, would have the things that Texas A&M do, you should have to succeed. And, they're sitting at 7-2 on the season. They still have to play Texas at the end of the year, so they're still, I would almost say, depending on that game, you're on the outside looking in as far as the college football playoffs.
If they lose, they're out. I think that's you. No 3-loss team is going to make the playoff this year with outside of a conference champion. I don't believe.
Right, and especially not a Texas A&M team. I mean, Dylan and I have talked about it too, where it seems like, you know, some of the rankings and there's a little bit of bias. I mean, you look at it, you've got Alabama back up in the top 12, you know, and they're not anywhere near what the Bama of the past, you know. So if I don't see Texas A&M do it, and even if they win against Texas, sure, maybe they find their way up there, but you know, it's going to be a big game at the end of the year, and you know, I don't know if I can see them stepping up and handling. They got a couple games that should be easy wins: New Mexico and Auburn. Though Auburn's been just a dumpster fire with Hugh Freeze this year, and yeah. As you look around some other games this week, we got to talk about Indiana. You know, they're sitting there at 9-0. I don't think anybody saw this coming in year one of Kurt Cignetti coming over from James Madison and taking over this Indiana program, but it kind of shows you what the transfer portal can do, you know, in this day and age. And they come out and beat Michigan State 47-10. You know, Rourke, who was questionable coming into this game, you know, due to some injury issues, he plays and just comes out and lights it up with 263 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air. Your guys' thoughts on Indiana and the success they're having this year?
Indiana, they showed me something here because they actually punted on 3 of their first 4 drives. They were losing 10-0 at the end of the first quarter. So, I mean, I know it's Michigan State. They're not great, but you want to be able to see that a team gets down and doesn't look back. Like they don't get down on themselves and let it snowball effect to it. Indiana got going, and obviously, you know, they were leading by halftime, scored 3 touchdowns in the second quarter. Don't allow another touchdown the rest of the way. They actually, the second half, they went safety, turnover on downs, punt against Michigan State. Michigan State actually, they had 3 drives that went for negative yards in the second half. That's partially on Michigan State. That's also partially on Indiana.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how I feel. You know, they definitely showed a little something more, especially when I looked at the score. I mean, I'm not gonna say I watched the game, but looking at the score, seeing them lose 10-0, I was like, man, maybe they're not as good as what I thought. You know what I thought they were going to be. But then to score 47 straight points, total stats for the game. I mean, Michigan State had negative 36 rushing yards. So, like Jake said, they had a couple drives for negative yards. I mean, they just couldn't get anything going. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and glorify Indiana for beating a bad Michigan State team, but to not play very well the first quarter and then come out and not allow a single point after that and score 47 straight. I mean, you got to be at least halfway decent to do that. So, yeah, I mean, they definitely played very well those games, and Rourke definitely played very well too.
Yeah, you're looking at you look at the rest of their schedule, their final 3 games. The toughest test there is at Ohio State. You know, that could have be a game that has big implications as far as the Big Ten. Because you look at their other 2 games, you're playing a 1-7 Purdue team to end the year, and then you have that Michigan team we just talked about earlier that they're struggling this year, and not to mention Indiana gets them at home. So I don't see a reason why they can't just take care of business there. And you know, that's the big game that I'm circling is Ohio State. That's going to be, you know, probably the truest test they're going to have all season as far as, you know, can they show people, are they really this good, or have their opponents they played just been average and now they're actually tested against somebody?
The thing for me this weekend when they play Michigan is the athletes, because Indiana hasn't played a team that has a team full of complete athletes. You know, Michigan State has Nick Marsh. He's a true freshman, playing incredible, has over 500 yards. You look back, Washington, there's a couple guys, but it's also full of transfers. This isn't the same Washington team as last year. Nebraska, again, you know, handful of guys. We're not talking about studs all over the field. Northwestern, Maryland, UCLA, you might as well put us out there. We're just as competitive as them. Michigan, this is where you start talking about, yes, I know they're 5-6 or 5-4, but you've got guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant up front. You've got some big dudes on that defensive line. I'm blanking on their stud linebacker, who's also pretty good. The secondary has some guys in it. They have struggled. If Will Johnson plays, that's what I'm going to be wanting to see. And then on the opposite side of the ball, what does Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullins do against them? Can they slow that down? Because this is the type of matchup with the skill players and the trenches that they're going to see against Ohio State. Michigan doesn't really have any good receivers, but Colston Loveland is going to do some damage. Can Colston Loveland, help them? He had over 100 yards against Oregon last week. I think Oregon's got a better secondary than Indiana. Is Indiana going to be able to game plan and take Colston Loveland out of the game?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be a fun game to the rest of the season to see what they do, because they've positioned themselves really good so far. And I think you're honestly, when you're looking at it, it's a three-way race right now for, I think, in the Big Ten. When you're looking at it, you've got, Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana right now. And you can probably kind of throw Penn State up there, but they've got the head-to-head loss with Ohio State. But it'll be interesting to see how they finish out the season. Other notable games: Miami beats Duke in the ACC 53-31. Don't let the score fool you. This game was actually pretty close for the most part of it, back and forth. And then Miami does its thing, they've turned it into a trend where late in the games they just figure out ways to win. I mean, that's what good teams do. Cam Ward comes out and shows why he's a Heisman contender. 400 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. And Damian Martinez and Mark Fletcher, these two running backs here, both with 65, 66 yards running the ball. So, I mean, Miami's positioned themselves to be right up there and to be to most likely win the ACC, especially with Clemson losing this week. You have SMU that beat Pitt. We'll talk about that game here in a little bit, but they're setting themselves up between Cam Ward and you got to talk about Xavier Restrepo as well. 146 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns on 8 receptions for this game. That connection between Cam Ward and him is firing on all cylinders right now.
Yeah, I almost feel like Miami's more comfortable when they're losing because other than like the Florida State game, the last handful of games, Duke, Louisville, they never were actually losing. Cal, Virginia Tech, they've all been either tied or losing, and they've played offensively some of their best games. So Xavier Restrepo is obviously incredible. He's a very, very good player. I feel like that we went through a decent period of time where Miami didn't have a dominant guy, and Restrepo also feels like he's been there 7 years at this point. So logically, he finally becomes Miami's all-time leading receiver because when you play for 10 years, you eventually get there.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jake. It's weird to see that these guys, where they ranked 4th now overall. They've been losing like every game, and then they find a way. I mean, like the Cal, or when they played Cal, losing 35-10 at halftime, and then only allowing 3 points in the whole second half, and putting up like 29 points, straight. I mean, they're incredible. And I just want to say, I know we talked about Heisman's, like earlier in the year or whatever. Cam Ward's name kind of came up. This guy is incredible. I mean, he just plays so nonchalantly. It's almost like there's no expression. Almost he doesn't get excited for anything. And he's got, over 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And he's first in QBR with 91.7. I mean, he's doing his thing, man. I mean, he's definitely one of the huge reasons of why they're at where they're at. So,
Cam Ward, when he was coming out of Incarnate Word 4 years ago at this point, I thought that he would become something big. The problem is Washington State's offense really didn't allow it. We got to see it a little bit last year. His first year, he wasn't very good. This year, we are seeing him finally with the right skill players around him. Damian Martinez, Xavier Restrepo are both obviously very talented. Mark Fletcher, another one. They've got Cam McCormick, who's actually in his 9th year playing football. But you see when you actually put decent skill players, a good offensive line in front of him, what he can do. He didn't really have that opportunity at Washington State. I was always confused why he considered going pro when he had one more year and he was going to be highly sought after.
I was about to say, I know back when, he decided to transfer and all the visits he took, it came down between, Miami and Florida State. And in the state of things right now, it seems like he made the right decision on which school to go to between these two in-state schools there. But yeah, I mean, he's playing himself right into easily being a top 10 pick next year. And, right up there, at this point, I'd almost say it's a three-horse race for the Heisman right now between Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, and Cam Ward. But it's hard to argue with the stats that Ward's put up this year so far. And, I mean, it's going to help his case if he, continues to win and takes this Miami team to the college football playoffs and potential, national championship game. And then, we hinted at it earlier. Louisville comes in and, upsets Clemson here, 33-21. Thoughts on this game, you guys? It kind of, shuts things down for Clemson as far as, potential for the ACC. I mean, they still could get there as far as that championship game, but, it makes that road a little bit tougher when you have a 5-0 SMU team in conference play.
To me, Dabo Swinney made a lot of rookie mistakes in this game and a lot of head-scratching calls. The very end of the first half, they get the ball, and they are at the Clemson 46-yard line. They're at their own 46-yard line, and there's actually a few seconds left. Instead of calling a timeout and throwing a Hail Mary, he opted just to go to the half. What are the chances you actually hit a Hail Mary? I don't know. Slim to none. But we've seen it happen. It can happen. There's no reason to not try it. Let me put it that way. Then when they're down 19, he opts to kick a field goal. When they are down, they're down at the 32. Or actually, they're even closer. My bad. They're at the 7-yard line. They're at the 7-yard line. He opts to kick a field goal. I understand you go from 19 to 16, but you also only have 12 minutes left. You need to start scoring touchdowns. And what happens? It gets blocked. They've already had one field goal blocked. The kicker has been unreliable that night. It's not worthy of trying it. They end up scoring then towards the end of the game. And instead of going for 2 to make it an 11-point game, they decided just to kick the extra point and go to 12. This really felt like Dabo Swinney, I don't want to say didn't care, but it was the lack of attention to this that I think should bother Clemson fans. The little things that can help you get there. I mean, what happens if you do hit a Hail Mary? All of a sudden it's 17-14 at half. What happens if you make that 4th down conversion and you score? You're back to 2 possessions. What happens if you go for 2 and you get it? It's an 11-point game. I mean, these little things can add up. Maybe they're not going to change the whole result for this game because Louisville did thoroughly beat them down. I also look like Clemson just quit because after Louisville ran a 1-play drive for 45 yards and their running back just got loose, wasn't even close. He was off to the races and nobody was even close to catching him. It just felt like Clemson gave up.
Yeah.
And that's sad to see because like even if you look at the box score, I mean, they dominated and Clemson themselves dominated in a lot of things. 450 total yards, 228 passing yards, 222 rushing yards, 31 first downs, 11 of 23 on 3rd down, 5 of 6 on 4th down, 101 plays total, no turnovers, and they had time possession. They had the ball for over almost 38 minutes compared to Louisville's 22. So I mean, there was a lot of domination on Clemson's front, but like you said, just the lack of maybe not caring and the rookie mistakes, I mean, that'll get you, especially to what Louisville, to who was unranked, was ranked previous, earlier in the season. But I mean, these are some teams you just can't overlook and make rookie mistakes like that against. And unfortunately for Clemson, I think they were ranked 11th at the time, losing. I mean, that one has to hurt. Having a spot potentially in the college playoffs and then taking a tough loss like that. That's got to put a stain on the season for Clemson.
Yeah, this is one where you look at the box scores, and I don't think the box scores tell the full story because Clemson had 203 yards between their final 3 drives, and that was all in the fourth quarter. Before that, in the first, I guess you call it 50 minutes of the game, they had a little over 240 yards or so. The final 3 drives, they almost doubled their total yards because they were moving quick. They scored 2 touchdowns. They go 61, 75, and 67 yards for the last 3 drives, including one where the clock just runs out. And it didn't feel like the same Clemson team. The Clemson that we're used to, it felt different. I mean, Phil Maffa, though, was running over guys. Phil Maffa had a great day. Phil Maffa had 171 yards. A lot of those were early in the game. And his long was 24. So if he's got 171 and he's averaging 6 yards a carry and his long is 24, he's getting chunks. He's not just hitting 1 or 2 home runs and going 2-3 yards the rest of the time. I really like to see Phil Maffa run. Klubnik did not have his best game, but I don't think the coaches put him in the best spot either.
Yeah, 100%. That's a tough loss for that Clemson team who, they're used to contending there. But, as we stay in the ACC here, SMU is killing it there for a season in the ACC, and I think they're surprising a lot of people. They're sitting at 8-1 on the season, 5-0 in conference play. That one loss being to BYU, who has also been a team that surprised a lot of people this year in the Big 12. But they come out and beat Pitt, who was one of the other undefeated teams in conference play, 48-25. And Kevin Jennings just has himself a night, 306 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns. Rashard Smith runs for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game. It's one of those things like it'll be interesting to see if we have a matchup between SMU and Miami for the ACC.
Over-under to me set at 90, and you should take the over for that game because those 2 teams can score. Kevin Jennings, everybody was concerned when SMU made the switch from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings back earlier in the year, especially after SMU lost to BYU, who we now know is actually a really good team. And SMU has just been rolling. SMU is on the verge of potentially making the playoffs. And I think that SMU could be a dangerous team if they make the playoffs. With the way that offense runs, now they still have a couple of games left. Boston College, they lost to Boston College in the bowl game last year. They had 10 wins, and Boston College was 6-6. Virginia and Cal kind of scares me a little bit there, but there's no reason SMU shouldn't win these final 3.
Yeah, I don't know. Personally, I didn't think SMU was going to be that great, but like you guys said, they've came out and they're a really good football team and they're dangerous. And like you said, this is what I'm so excited about with the 12-team playoff. You get a team like this, who you wouldn't think would, possibly be there and be dangerous. I mean, they're dangerous. You get that 12-team playoff, you start playing teams you never played before. You get a team like these guys, they might come in and, do some damage because it wasn't even close. I mean, going into the third quarter, it was 31-3. They were really laying it down on Pittsburgh, who a lot of people thought was a decent team. So, Pittsburgh's backup quarterback Yarnell, he did a little more damage than Holstein did. 9 of 10 for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. So
Now, Holstein's coming off of a supposed concussion. I was out covering the Syracuse Pitt game last week, and Holstein left the game early. So I kind of wonder if there may be something lingering from that. Holstein's played pretty well, but when he hasn't faced too many good defenses this year. Against Pitt, he didn't have much success. So Pitt also had 5 interceptions and 3 return or touchdowns, so they didn't need Holstein to do anything. But I wonder if there might have been a lingering injury there that didn't help him at all this week.
Yeah, 100%. That's something to consider. But yeah, I think this SMU team has been a surprise this year. In their jump from the AAC to the ACC. along with, you see what BYU's doing in year 2 of the Big 12 for them. With that, we'll jump over to week 11 and start with our pick'ems here. And, this should be another fun week of them. And it starts us off with Navy and South Florida. We've seen this Navy team that, they were ranked a few weeks ago. You have Army that's up to 18 this week. A game that's going to be in Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. Navy comes in this game favored by 3, coming off a loss to Rice. Back-to-back losses for Navy. You have South Florida coming off back-to-back wins versus UAB and FAU. Thoughts on this game? Over under 55.5 for this game.
I actually like I like UCF or USF in this game. I think Alex Golish is building a really good program down there. They have 4 losses, but all 4 losses are to actually pretty good teams. When you talk about Alabama and Miami, you got 2 top 12 programs. Memphis was on the verge of potentially being a contender in this conference. And then the other one's Tulane, who's probably also going to make the conference championship game. So all 4 teams are going to have winning records and will be in bowl games this year. FAU was, not a very good team, and Alex Golish was fired up when he, gave his handshake to Tom Herman. I think they keep it rolling, and I think this game being in South Florida gives the Bulls a chance here.
Yeah, I'm also going to go the same way. I don't know. I mean, all those, like Navy and Army, those schools are, basically kind of the same when they, the type of offense that they particularly tend to run. But I just, out of talent-wise, like you said, that South Florida has faced compared to Navy, I feel like they're built a little different. They face a little harder competition. I feel like they're probably more battle-ready than Navy. So I'm also going to take the South Florida Bulls here to win.
Yeah, I'm going to go the opposite. I'm going to take these Navy midshipmen to continue having a decent season on their end. They've had a tough couple of losses in these past 2 games, but I think what they've been able to do this season, you see Horvath for them, he's been getting the job done, being the guy for them and leading this team. So, give me the midshipmen to go down to Raymond James Stadium in Tampa and get the win here. We'll continue on. You've got a very interesting matchup here. Dylan and I talked about how bad this matchup was last. Syracuse versus Boston College in Alumni Stadium in Chestnut Hill. The Syracuse team that's been up and down. Former Buckeye Kyle McCord leads this team. Had a bad game a few weeks ago versus Pitt where he threw 5 interceptions, with 3 of those being pick sixes. You've got Boston College coming off a bye week and a loss previously to Louisville. Boston College favored by 1 in this game, so this is a coin toss game here, with that over-under being a 53.5.
I'll take Syracuse here. I really liked how Kyle McCord bounced back. Obviously, throwing 5 interceptions in a game, not good, especially when you throw 3 pick sixes. You really cost yourself the game. Virginia Tech's a really good team. I really like what Virginia Tech does. So beating them in overtime, that's a big game. It gets Syracuse to 6 wins, gets them to be bowl eligible. In Boston College being favored, feels like Vegas might know something here. Tommy Castellanos, is going to play. And of course we get the famous Cincinnati Reds announcer who is going to announce this game. And Castellanos is also going to be the quarterback. Can only hope that we get the iconic line that, he's a man of faith. But I'm going to take Kyle McCord here and Syracuse Orange. I just think that between them and the weapons they have on offense, they'll be able to get it done.
Yeah, I'm conflicted both ways. I like Kyle McCord. There are some games he loses games that he shouldn't. He makes mistakes when he shouldn't. But that win against Virginia Tech is, even though it went to overtime, that win against Virginia Tech, that's a good win. And it seems like, it was nice to watch him bounce back. It was nice to watch the whole team bounce back after the loss to Pitt. It seems like, if you're able to do that, and just pick right up where you left off after a bad loss, that's always a good thing to see. And Boston College is kind of on a downfall with 3 straight losses and 1 being to Virginia Tech. So as much as I'm not a huge fan of Kyle McCord. I think they have enough there to get it done. So I'll go with Syracuse here.
Yeah, I'll follow you to it and agree with that. I think to see what they've done and bouncing back from that loss against Pitt, and seeing them come out and get a big win over Virginia Tech in overtime was big for them, and getting that confidence built back. I think they get it done here against Boston College and get the win. We jump over to the SEC in another big matchup in terms of conference play. You've got the Georgia Bulldogs headed to Oxford to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium to take on the Ole Miss Rebels. Georgia sitting at 7-1, ranked number 2. Ole Miss 7-2, 16. Georgia's favored by 2.5. They came off it's another one of those games with that line that you like to use, Jake. I think when you look at Georgia and Florida last week, it was a surprisingly close game for how bad Florida's been this year. And I think it shows some of the inconsistencies that Georgia has. They got the job done, won by 14-30 to 24 or 34 to 20. But this has the chance to be a game where you have Carson Beck versus Jackson Dart in a shootout game. That's a tough one to take there. The over under 54.5. The Georgia defense still shows that it can be a tough defense, but the struggles that Carson Beck's had this year, and from time to time not looking consistent and maybe some bad decision making, makes this game a interesting watch.
Yeah, I have two thoughts here. This game is either going to get really, really ugly or it's going to be a massive shootout because you have Ole Miss who's coming off of a massive victory over Arkansas where they demolished them and scored 60 points. 2 weeks prior, though, they beat Oklahoma by 12, and Oklahoma was winning at one point. Oklahoma is terrible right now. Georgia, Carson Beck has looked awful the last 3 weeks. He's thrown 8 interceptions over his last 3 games. For those doing math, he has thrown more than 1 interception every game, and he's thrown 11 in his last 5. It's not a good stat. So I really don't think that Carson Beck's going to get any better. Problem is, I don't think that Ole Miss is going to be able to beat Georgia. I think this becomes an ugly game. I think Georgia's defense steps up again. I think Georgia wins. I would be shocked if Lane Kiffin beat Georgia. I will accept it, but I do not believe Lane Kiffin can beat Kirby Smart.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's similar to like James Franklin. You talk about Lane Kiffin, he has finds some success here, but can he win those big games to get him where he wants to? And it's like a lot of people have talked like it's wonder. The thought has been said has kind of Lane Kiffin reached that kind of peak of success that he can with the resources and everything he has at Ole Miss. He brought in a ton of talent to through the transfer portal. He loses Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State, but he brings in a ton of transfers into this program, and everybody's like, well, if this is going to be a year for Ole Miss to come out and make the playoffs and potentially contend for the SEC, then this is going to be the year to do it. But I kind of favor like what you're saying. I don't know if he can get it done against Kirby Smart, even if Carson Beck doesn't have the greatest of games. I mean, you look back at that Texas game. Carson Beck had a bad game, but they still managed to win with that Georgia defense. And I think that's one thing you got to consider here is that Georgia defense is probably going to be one of the toughest defense that Ole Miss is going to see all season. And, it's going to be a tough game.
Yeah, the whole time you guys been talking, that's literally the only thing that I can think about. Every part of me wants to pick Ole Miss because I hate Georgia. I do. They're like the new Alabama for me. I can't stand them. But even though Carson Beck has been atrocious, I feel like all year, actually, excuse me, I feel like the whole Georgia offense has not been good. I feel like it's not been up to par, like we've seen. But that Georgia defense is still really good, and they're really big, and they're really strong, and they're really tough, and they're really fast, and they're just good all over the field. And as much as I want to take Ole Miss, especially after what they did to Arkansas last week, and I think Arkansas is a pretty decent team. I just don't know if that offense is going to be able to get it done against that Georgia defense. So I think
the Ole Miss offensive line has improved, but Georgia's defensive line still has some dudes on it. You guys got like Jalen Walker and Michael Williams. If those two can wreak havoc and make Jackson Dart have to, I know Jackson Dart can move, but if they can put them behind the sticks, put them in second and third and long, that's how Georgia's going to win this game. And I think they're going to have success.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm taking the Dogs in this one. I think, Kirby Smart, we saw it during the Texas game when everybody thought, after that loss to Alabama, that Texas was going to come in and just, win the game, especially at home in Austin. Kirby Smart came in and showed that they're not done yet, and that they have that proverbial chip on their shoulder, even though they're, ranked number 2. So I think they're going to come in here, and even if Carson Beck has a bad game where he throws 3 picks, this Georgia defense is going to keep them in every game this season. So you jump over, you have, like I mentioned before, the number 18 Army Black Knights headed to Denton, Texas to take on the North Texas Mean Green Army, favored by 5.5 in this game. 63.5 over under daily for Army. Doesn't blow you out of the water with his passing stats, only 629 yards on the season, 7 touchdowns, but he is their leading rusher, 909 yards and 19 touchdowns on the ground for daily in this Army Black Knight offense.
This is actually the first team that has a winning record that Army is going to face. We saw them struggle with Air Force, and I know that's a rivalry game, but Air Force only has 1 win on the year. East Carolina had some success against them. If I was betting on this game, I would probably take North Texas to cover and Army to win. I think this game is actually going to be close. North Texas can move the ball. I'm just not sure that North Texas can be able to stop Army.
Yeah, Army they run that RPO type of offense, don't they?
They run the triple option.
Yeah, that's just, if you're not well prepared for it, that's a thing that could definitely get. That's definitely a type of offense.
Assignment football. Your linebackers have to play assignments. Your edge rushers cannot crash down, because if they crash, it's just going to go to somebody else. You have to play assignment football. But I think one thing with this conference is these guys have been playing Navy for a couple of years. This isn't like it's never seen before. That Navy runs the same style of offense, so it's not like it's a fully foreign concept to them.
Yeah. I don't pick them very often, but give me North Texas for the upset here. I'm taking the upset. No, Tulane and Memphis are both decent. Both decent teams. We just talked about them. North Texas, even though they lost to both of them, they put up 37 against one and 44 against the other. And like Jake said, Army really hasn't faced anybody with a winning record up to this point. Actually, at all, I think is what he said. So, seems like North Texas can move the ball pretty well. Moore's almost 2,900 yards, 26 interceptions, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So I think they're going to move the ball. I think they'll be able to move the ball. So I'm going to take the Mean Green.
Yeah, give me the Black Knights to continue their season that they're having, and get the win over here at North Texas here. Jumping over, we have Iowa State, the Cyclones, coming off of a last-minute loss to Texas Tech, playing Kansas at Arrowhead Stadium. So they will be playing in the Chiefs Stadium for their second game of the season for Kansas. Kansas 2-6. Iowa State coming off that loss. I'm surprised that Iowa State's only favored by 3 in this game. Bet for Iowa State has been tremendous this year. I think the season hasn't went the way that a lot of Kansas fans thought it might be after some of the success they found last year. But this one is pretty simple to me. I'm taking Iowa State to bounce back after a tough last-minute loss over Texas Tech here and get the win over Kansas.
Yeah, I'm also at the follow suit. I just doesn't seem like Kansas has been a very proficient team, like you said, even though they had some success last year. Just seems like they haven't been able to kind of find the right groove on offense and or defense. So I'm going to take Iowa State to kind of bounce back here.
If you took every one-loss game for Kansas this year and flipped it around, Kansas would be 7-1. Kansas has been this close every single game with the exception of TCU. Lose by 6 to Illinois, lose by 3 to UNLV, lose by 4 to West Virginia, lose by 4 to Arizona State, lose by 2 to Kansas State. All of those teams are actually bowl-eligible teams as well, except West Virginia. TCU also is 5-4. All of those teams are going to be going to bowls for the most part. Maybe West Virginia won't be. So they've played and lost to really good teams. Houston just beat Kansas State, and they whooped up on Houston. I love Jalen Daniels. I think Jalen Daniels is a stud. I think that Kansas is playing a little bit better. They probably should have beat Kansas State. I'm going to take Kansas to pull the upset. Also because I think I would love to see Iowa State lose again, because then it makes pure and utter chaos in the Big 12. And then I want Colorado to lose, because then we get true chaos, and who knows who makes the championship game then.
Very true. That's been the theme of this season so far, is chaos. So we'll see if that continues. We continue on here back to the ACC. Clemson, we just talked about them. They are headed to Blacksburg, Virginia, to take on Virginia Tech. This has a chance to be an interesting, guys. Clemson game. Clemson comes in favored 6.5, 53.5 over under here. We talked about it. Some of the decisions that were made last week in that game by Dabo Swinney, and the position that Cade Klubnik has taken care of the ball this year, 21 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, but, hadn't been put in some of the best positions. And you have a Virginia Tech team that, took Syracuse to overtime last week, unfortunately loses. You see their Virginia Tech team that loses to Miami in what was a controversial call there at the end of that game. I think this game has the chance to be an interesting game.
I think Clemson's going to bounce back pretty strong here. Virginia Tech has been incredibly up and down. You look at Virginia Tech's schedule, people get concerned that you lose to Vanderbilt. They also lose to Rutgers, lose to Miami, lose Syracuse. All those teams are pretty good, but the Rutgers has fallen off a cliff, though. The other 3 are all pretty good. Clemson, also a pretty good team. Virginia Tech has done well against the teams that are mid to bad. I don't think they're going to be able to hold up. Blacksburg, I think, is going to be rocking, though. This is one of the biggest games on their schedule. It's the biggest game that's at home, at least this year. I think this game is going to be rocking. I think it's going to be loud. But I like Clemson. I think they learned from their mistakes. I think this is a get-right week, because Clemson still does have an outside shot at the ACC. It would take a lot, but there is potential for them to somehow get there with one loss. If SMU or Miami drop a game, you start getting all some sorts of weird tiebreakers.
Yeah, I'm going to follow suit, especially after what Maffa. I feel like he's going to do the same thing. I mean, he had a great week last week. I think he continues it again. I think Klubnik, he didn't have the worst week, but he didn't have the best week last week either. But I think he bounces back too. And I think what we call some of those rookie mistakes, like Jake had said, from Dabo Swinney, and maybe the lack of, therefore, not caring a little bit. I don't think that happens again, so I'll take Clemson to bounce back.
Yeah, we'll make that a clean sweep. I think Clemson does bounce back in this game, after a tough one last week. And like you said, it's an outside shot, but they still have a shot for the ACC. And it would take a lot, but it's also going to continue. It's going to take them continuing to win and bounce back here, and I think that's what they do here. We'll jump over to the Big 12 here, where you have the Colorado Buffs headed to Lubbock, Texas, to Jones AT&T Stadium to take on Texas Tech. We just talked about it. They got a big win last week over Iowa State, last minute in that game, 23-22. You had Colorado on bye this week. They're 2 weeks ago having a win over Cincinnati, 34-23. Colorado favored by 3 in this game on the road, over under 62.5. So lots of points in this game. You have Shadur Sanders and Morton for Texas Tech. Both a lot of yards to the air, both taking care of the ball. this, I know you just said it, Jake. You want to see Colorado continue to lose here, but it could be a fun game in Lubbock, Texas this week.
Yeah, I really would love to see Texas Tech win, but I don't think they're going to be able to. I don't think they're going to be able to pull the upset 2 weeks in a row. Taj Brooks, one of the best running backs in the country. The big thing for Colorado, though, is that offensive line is actually playing very, very well. Before the year, nobody really knew what they were going to get. It was a makeshift. 2 years in a row, makeshifting your offensive line typically doesn't work very well. But Jordan Seaton, he was a 5-star left tackle, has started to play pretty well. It took him a little bit to get into his own, but he's playing pretty well there. Colorado still isn't really running the ball a ton, but when you've got, guys like Jimmy Horn and Travis Hunter on the outside, do you really need to throw it much? Shedeur Sanders, is obviously a pretty good quarterback. I think that Texas Tech can give them some trouble, but I also think Iowa State does not have as strong of an offense as Colorado does. I'm going to take Colorado to win this game. Not super confident in it, though.
Yeah, I'm going to take Colorado too. I've literally picked Colorado for every game so far. I've literally picked them to win. I've literally just been on the bandwagon. The only thing that scared me in the beginning of the year was their offensive line. Like Jake said, I think everybody knew their offensive line wasn't that great. Shedeur Sanders was always getting pressured. You can throw the ball a lot, but whenever you're getting sacked 8 times a game, that doesn't really help. But it seems like after that loss in Nebraska, slowly but surely they've been playing well. Even in that game against KSU, I thought their offensive line played better. If you give Shedeur Sanders time, he's gonna get you somewhere. The only thing that I don't like about Colorado is still to this day they have no run game whatsoever. It's literally Shedeur Sanders or nothing. That's basically all it is for them. But I do think talent-wise stacked up, especially with their offensive line playing better. I do think that does give them enough to win. So I'm going to take Colorado.
Yeah, I agree with you guys there. I think Colorado does get the win here. It's like we said, that offensive line has been playing better. It's that was kind of the storyline going into the season this year is can they keep Shedeur Sanders upright and give him the ability to get the ball to those playmakers on the outside, Jimmy Horn, Travis Hunter. We know what Travis Hunter does, on both sides of the ball, immensely talented there. I think they get the job done. Like Dylan said, even though they don't have much of a run game, their leading rusher having, a little over 200 yards on the season. It's not a good sign, but, they've found ways to get it done this year. And, to Jake's point, I don't know if Texas Tech can get the upset done 2 weeks in a row. So give me Colorado on this one as well. We'll jump over to the SEC now. You have South Carolina headed to Nashville, Tennessee to First Bank Stadium to take on the bowl-eligible 6-3 Vanderbilt Commodores. Surprised to say that one. Dylan and I have talked about this before. This is not your Vanderbilt of old that is just the bottom-of-the-barrel SEC team that everybody beats up on. They are bowl-eligible for the first time in a long time. And you have South Carolina coming off that big win against Texas A&M. It's like I said about Texas A&M last week, and this applies here for South Carolina. Can they avoid the hangover after a big home emotional win over Texas A&M, to go on the road? And, Vanderbilt's ranked 24. So, South Carolina's favored by 3 in this game. I think it could be a fun win in Nashville.
I'm going to take Vanderbilt. I can't go against Diego Pavia. That dude just is a winner. He's a gamer. I don't really care if he makes mistakes. He just knows how to get it done. He gave Texas a fight earlier this year. They lose to Missouri, and they probably should have won that game. Georgia State is still a very confusing game earlier this year. But Diego Pavia is the owner of Alabama. He's never lost a game against Alabama. I know this is South Carolina, but I just like to bring up that stat. That he's 4-0 against teams from the state of Alabama. Just a fun tidbit for you. And I'm going to take Diego Pavia this weekend. I think it's a big win for South Carolina, and I think you can see a little bit of a hangover, but just because this isn't, your father's grand Vanderbilt team, I think there can still be a little bit of it's just Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I'm also going to have to follow suit. I've liked the way they played. I was really happy when they beat Alabama. That's another team that I literally can't stand. But, they beat Alabama. Played a tough game against Kentucky, who overall I don't think is a terrible team. They play tough all season. They almost almost come back and pull an upset against Texas, and they struggle a little bit against Auburn. But SEC football is just it's different no matter who you play. I know South Carolina's coming off a big win, but we talked about Texas A&M. Basically who they are. I just like Vanderbilt. They're not the same team who we think. Pavia is just his intensity just brings something a little extra to the team. And I think it's probably a close game, but I think Vanderbilt they do enough to win the game.
Yeah, I agree here, guys. I think Vanderbilt continues its success. They ranked 24. Diego Pavia has just been insane this season. Like you guys said, they probably should beat Missouri earlier in the season, and they're sitting at 7 wins. Georgia State, like you said, it's confusing there, but it's at home for them. You just saw them come off of a game where they had a close game with Texas, and for a home game, I'm going to take Vanderbilt. I've liked what they've done so far this season, and it's hard to, like you guys said, to bet against Diego Pavia so far this season. We stay in the SEC in what is probably one of the bigger matchups of the weekend. You have Alabama headed to Baton Rouge, Death Valley at night to take on LSU. Both teams, are coming off bye weeks, and Alabama favored by 2.5 in this one, 59.5 over under. This has a chance to be an interesting game as far as what it means for the SEC, but also tell me the last time you've seen a 3-loss Alabama team. It's been a long time since you've seen Alabama lose more than 2 games in a season. And this is an LSU team that's wanting to bounce back against a tough loss against A&M on the road. But at the end of the day, it's still tough to play down in Baton Rouge at night.
I'm going to take Alabama here. I am not fully trusting LSU still. Just something about them right now isn't sitting right with me. Alabama had their get-right game against Missouri, who I know was beat up, but winning 35-0. I know Brady Cook started the game. They still have talented wide receivers with Luther Burden and Mookie Cooper over there. Nate Noel, I believe, did not play for Missouri, but shutting out a team that is ranked in the top 25, fringe top 25, is still important. I mean, teams let up points to New Mexico State. Shutting out Missouri is a pretty big thing. The LSU losing to A&M, the way they lost, has me concerned. So I'm going to take Alabama, even if I don't fully trust Jalen Milroe, even if I'm not fully sold on Alabama to do anything the rest of the year. I think they knock out LSU this weekend.
Yeah, Alabama is one of those teams where they just kind of – it's a weird Alabama team. It's a non-Nick Saban Alabama team. Win against Georgia, lose against Vanderbilt. Win against South Carolina, lose against Tennessee. And then you blow up Missouri. I understand Missouri was ranked. And for a while there, they were good, but I don't think Missouri – I don't think they're that. I don't think they're very good at all. But it just seems like Alabama, they just always find a way to win the big games, especially when you need them to. And if they could even play 60% of how they played against Georgia, I think they, I'm not going to say they beat LSU with ease, but I still think they beat LSU. So I'm going to take Alabama here. I think Jalen Miller, I think he probably has a really good game. He seems to be up and down, but I just think, like I said earlier, they find a way to win these big games. So I just don't think LSU beats Alabama. I think Alabama takes this one over.
Yeah, I agree there. It's one of those things. It's not your Nick Saban Alabama team, but at the end of the day, I think they got, like you said, their get-right game against Missouri last week, even though they're struggling. And like Jake said, the way that LSU lost that game against A&M, you saw Garrett Nussmeier struggle. And, that game plan is out there on how you kind of make him feel uncomfortable. You look at that LSU offensive line, they've been really good this year. But, A&M showed some ways to get pressure and, make Garrett Nussmeier feel uncomfortable. And, you saw him throw several interceptions late in that game. And, I think Alabama does get the win here. This is going to be the Home Depot game of the week. So it should be a good one in the SEC. And I think Alabama gets the job done on the road in a tough environment in Death Valley. Wrapping up here, we go to the Big 12. Like we've talked about, the surprise of the season, the BYU Cougars are headed to Salt Lake City, Utah to take on the Utes. BYU comes in favored in this game, over under 41.5. We know Utah's notoriously a team that plays well in big games, even though they may not be having the greatest of seasons. But at the end of the day, I think you see BYU come in here and potentially continue the success they've had this season.
Utah's lost 4 in a row. I know it's a rivalry game. I know they're going to be up for it. I know the game is at home. But Utah's offense is anemic, is putting it nicely right now. They've scored 14, 7, 19, and 10 points over their last 4 games. BYU's offense is scored 37 in the last game alone. I'm not trusting Utah to score enough points to win this game. I think Utah's defense is going to be one of the better that BYU faces, but I'm not in on Isaac Wilson. I don't think that he has the capability to win this game.
Yeah, and once again, I'm at the fall suit. Like you said, I mean, one team has dropped 4 straight and struggled against Oklahoma State, who is also, I don't think, a very good football team. And then another one is undefeated and has been playing very well on both sides of the ball and averaging about 35 points a game. So, like Caleb said, BYU is kind of the surprise of the season, and they're actually a really good football team. So I think BYU comes in here and takes this one.
Yeah, it's one of those games. I think Retzlaff gets it done again. He's 18 touchdowns to 7 interceptions on the season. Probably one of the tougher defenses that they will see. Utah is notorious for being a team that has a good defense. We've seen it in the past. It kept them in some of these bigger games. But on the offensive side of the ball, yeah, Isaac Wilson, I don't think he has enough to get it done. Their offense is, not finding ways to score, a combined, 30 points in the past 2 games, where you look at BYU 37, 38, 41 in the past 3. I think BYU continues to keep it rolling here and will remain undefeated, and we'll see where they jump to. They're 9 this week. They get a win, depending on some teams above them. You could see them getting closer to that top 5 range. And I think they're solidifying themselves for a shot to not only make the Big 12 championship game, but to possibly win that game. That wraps up our pick'ems for this week. Is there any other big games this week that we didn't talk about with this pick'em that you guys want to talk about this week?
No, I think you covered them all.
Yeah, it should be a fun week. Another game just to see how bad they've been this season. You've got Florida State taking on Notre Dame. Florida State's 1-8, and they'll probably be 1-9 after this week. It's just insane to see the 360 that they've taken from last year to this year. And Dylan and I talked about it a little bit, at the beginning of this year, that maybe the problem was DJU. Well, they've switched quarterbacks, and it still has not fixed their problem. And I don't know if they can just chalk this up to a bad year, but I don't think they'll get rid of him. But, I think the pressure on Mike Norvell is ratcheting up very much, with the rate of how the seasons went.
It's just proof that you can't use the portal to rebuild your team. You need to hit. You cannot take so many misses. DJU, the problem is we all knew what he was before that. If you weren't watching him at Clemson and Oregon State, I don't know what to tell you. You bring in guys like Roydell Williams, who you hope would be pretty good out of Alabama. It just isn't working. I mean, you wouldn't expect to be this bad. Florida State also was dealt a pretty unlucky schedule. As much as I want to trash them, you start the season with Georgia Tech, Boston College, who are better than people expected. Memphis was on the verge of being a group of 5 playoff contender. Cal is way better. SMU is on the verge of being a playoffs. Clemson is a pretty darn good team. Duke is already having 6 wins. Miami is probably going to win the ACC. Losing to North Carolina is unacceptable. They probably should have beaten North Carolina. North Carolina is terrible. But Notre Dame, I could see them giving them a fit for a little bit just because they're getting hype for it. You know, the season's over. You got nothing to lose. I could see them. They've got talented guys on that offense. Guys like Hakeem Williams are a talented wide receiver. Problem is they've got to catch the ball. There's so many drops this year. So many drops by Florida State wide receivers that would have been touchdowns. And it's not because the passes getting broken up. They're just dropping them. And I could see them making it close, but Notre Dame's going to run away with this game.
Yeah, I don't see him winning. But it would be funny, you get toward the end of the season and, Notre Dame pulls like how they did against NIU and then just lose a game that they probably shouldn't lose.
Destroys Notre Dame's playoff hopes.
It wouldn't surprise me with how Notre Dame is sometimes, but no, I mean, Florida State's just really bad. And it's just kind of sad to see, especially after having the season they did last year. But yeah, I mean, they're probably going to end up 1-9. I don't think they come close to Notre Dame.
Yeah, with the rest of their schedule, they're going to be lucky to, go finish the season with 2 wins because their remaining schedule is Notre Dame on the road, Charleston Southern at home. You should win that game, but I'm not going to put anything past Florida State. And then you end the season with the big rivalry game versus Florida at home. And, we joked it at the beginning of the year, but this has the chance to be a toilet bowl game there between, Florida. They haven't been as bad as Florida State, but they've still been bad. And it's been a year where I'll be surprised if Billy Napier makes it through the rest of the year, because you saw in that Georgia game, DJ Lagway, they already lost Graham Mertz for the season with a torn ACL. Then you lose DJ Lagway, they didn't necessarily say he's out for the season, but it's a pretty significant injury there. And, they're on their 3rd string quarterback who played last season at Yale and walked on to the team this past spring. So they're starting quarterback is a 3rd string walk-on that played at Yale last season. So it's going to be a tough sledding for both those teams the rest of the way through.
DJ Lagway might play this week, so I'd be interested. They said that he's not ruled out. I can't imagine he plays for their own long-term longevity with the program. There's no reason for him to play, so I would hope that he wouldn't. But you never know when your job's on the line.
Yeah,
very true.
Well, that's been another exciting week of Saturday Showdown. We'll get to see these big Week 11 games. We'll see what happens, see if there's more chaos. That's been the storyline of this season. And, we'll see you guys back here next Monday to recap all of the Week 11 excitement and college football once again. We'll see you guys next week.